All right, guys, let's try this again. No, getting this out late um, today. And this is Tuesday, so this is part two of. Find my notes here. Where did I put that? All right, this is part two of lesson 2 on chapter 7. And so hopefully this will work. I'm trying to fool around with this stuff all day trying to get it to work. But anyway, so let's try it again. So we were talking about the Reign of Terror. And as you can see there, about 500,000 were arrested. At least 40,000 killed. Some people think it's a little more than that. A lot of people killed, mostly by the guillotine, some by shooting, lynching. We talked about the town of Lyon, where he killed the whole village of several hundred people because of what some people were suspected of being traitors. And so I was getting ready to tell you about Marie Antoinette. She's also going to be a victim of the Reign of Terror. As I said, there was no way for anybody to be safe. And we'll talk about that here in a little while. But Marie Antoinette was hated by the peoples. We said Louis had some respect for a while, but they had always hated her. They eventually put her in a prison, and the prison doors were very tall, normally I think about 8 feet or something like that. But they made her door a whole lot shorter just to humiliate her. So when she would come out to be interrogated, she had to bow down in front of everybody. So they really hated this woman. So they did anything they could do to humiliate her. So they're going to put her on trial in 1793 to also demonstrate how much they hated her. One of her best friends one of her shopping buddies that she hang around with, Princess de Lamballe, they dismembered her in the streets. I mean, they literally tore her apart and marched her body parts, paraded around the streets of Paris. That's how much they hated Marie Antoinette. And so she has a trial. She's found guilty, of course. In October of 1793, Marie Antoinette was executed at the age of 37. Her famous last words were, "Pardon me, monsieur, I did not do that on purpose." She accidentally hit or she kind of kicked Sasson, the lead executioner, and that was the last thing she said. A lot of guillotine victims, sometimes they would let you give a little speech before, but they didn't let her give one. So that's what she said. There were witnesses to that. One of the things she's always famous for is for saying, "Let them eat cake." And there is no record of her saying that. This doesn't appear until decades after she's dead. And so it's often been attributed to her, but I don't have any solid evidence that she ever actually said it. Let them eat cake when she was told about the people starving. And cake for them was not like birthday cake like you and I. You're going, oh, well, that's not so bad. Cake for them was like rotten bread. So it sounds like something that she might have said, but there's no real evidence that she actually said that. Again, that rumor came out years after she was dead as people continued to try to discredit her. Okay, but anyway, she will be beheaded as well. Her execution went a lot smoother than her husband's did, so that was good for her. Marie and Louis, they had 4 kids overall, so I'll talk just briefly about them, one in particular. So Marie Therese was the oldest child, and she was really the only one that lived for any length of time, but she wound up having a miserable marriage and a miserable life, and she herself did not have any children. So she lived the longest. She doesn't die until 1851, but not a very good life by all accounts. Louis Joseph was the second child, but he only lived to be about 7 or 8 years old, died of tuberculosis. Then you had Louis Charles, who dies in 1795. So he was taken from her when they were arrested. He was taken from her in July of 1793, or 1792 rather. and he was forced to testify against her. And again, they wanted to discredit her, kind of like we saw with Anne Boleyn. You know, they wanted to accuse her of incest with her brother, and well, they do the same thing here. And so they forced the kid to testify against his own mother, that his own mother had sexually abused him and they'd committed incest. There's no evidence that that actually occurred, and I seriously doubt that it did. But the kid testified against her because he'd been tortured. He, according to his jailer, he never spoke another word after the trial. He was so traumatized by having to lie and call his mother all kinds of names, and they said that he never spoke again. And so he winds up, according to Robespierre, he dies of tuberculosis while he was in prison. Again, that was in 1795. And then the youngest daughter, Sophie Helene, she was born premature, and she died from convulsions while she was teething, and she was only about a year old. So that was the four children. But the key one again was Louis Charles, who testified against his mother. Antoine Simon was a friend of Robespierre. He was the jailer who was responsible for torturing the young boy and trying to brainwash him against his parents. And he's the one that told us that the kid never spoke another word. So he winds up dying at the age of 10. Now, the doctor who did the autopsy decided to keep the boy's heart as a souvenir. People do stuff like that sometimes, I guess, with famous people. So there were a lot of rumors over the years, a lot of imposters, and so they finally passed down through the family. Again, they said this was the heart of the son of Louis and Marie Antoinette. They did a DNA test on the heart in the year 2000, and the heart was rock hard. They had to cut a piece of it off. And they did have a piece of Marie Antoinette's hair, and so they were able to use the DNA test with this. And they proved that it was, in fact, the heart of the little boy. And so they buried the heart in the crypt with his parents in the year 2004. We don't know what happened to the body, so it was never found. Well, during this time, as I said, there was no way to be safe. If you talked to people, you risked being misinterpreted. If you didn't talk to anybody, well, that's suspicious. Why is that guy not saying something? And so there was really no way to protect yourself. So you might think, well, you know what? I'll just be really good buddies with Robespierre. That'll save me. Well, it doesn't. Because Robespierre, like a lot of other absolute dictators, he comes down with that disease of paranoia. Thinks everybody's out to get him. And who best to get him but the people that are closest to him, right? And so he reasons that out in his head that all these people that claim to be my good friends, they're probably plotting against me. And so he really kills a lot of his best friends, a lot of his supporters. He winds up sending them to the guillotine. And so, and Danton was one of those who was again one of the other radical leaders. And Danton was killed in April of 1794 because he had dared to criticize Robespierre on the terror, and that's not really good for your health to do that. And so finally, Robespierre's paranoia is going to come true, as a lot of people around him realized that there was no way to be safe, there was no way to protect themselves, that Robespierre had completely lost his mind. He was just killing everybody. Again, he believed he was going to purify France by doing that, but nobody was safe. And so it turned out they decided they really were out to get him. And so Robespierre is going to be arrested by some of the other Jacobins. They shoot him in the face because he tries to get away while they're trying to arrest him. And this was on July 27th, 1794. And then Robespierre himself goes to the guillotine on the next day. So that's probably appropriate. He probably deserved that since he killed tens of thousands of people by chopping their heads off. But by this point, the people were sick of the Reign of Terror. They talked about the square there in Paris where all the executions were. The blood flowed like a river, they said, and you could never get the smell of blood out of the streets. Even when the rain would come, there was so much blood that they said when you walked through the city, you could just smell it. It was just horrible. And so the people were sick of this, and so that once Robespierre is dead, they turn against the radicals, and the radicals are going to lose control of the revolution, and that brings an end to the Reign of Terror. Now remember, these people claim that they were against the rich people, the aristocrats. That's who they were going to get rid of, and that was going to make France so much better. But notice this: 85% of those executed were actually members of the Third Estate, people that the revolution was supposed to help. That's who the radicals wind up killing more of. And of course, that was the bulk of the population, understandably so, but you would think they wouldn't have killed that many Third Estate, but that's actually the people that really get victimized by all this. Now, what Robespierre had hoped to create was what he called the Republic of Virtue. And he claimed that all the bloodshed would create this. If we could just kill all the bad people, all the people that are against the revolution, then we will be in so much better. We will create this Republic of Virtue. And he was influenced here by Rousseau. We talked about Rousseau earlier, that he was really into making people virtuous and that sort of thing. So some influence there. So Robespierre wants everybody to be considered equal. The guillotine is one of those things that we're going to kill everybody the same way. He required everybody to take the title of citizen, no matter their family or their income or where they lived or whatever. Everybody was addressed as citizen. And so, good morning, citizen Robespierre, good morning, citizen whoever. And everybody called everybody citizen as a title to kind of show equality. Now, a lot of people wonder why the French Revolution, which was inspired by the American Revolution, why did the French Revolution become so much bloodier? Why was there so much more violence and bloodshed than there was in the American Revolution? Well, some people theorize it was probably because of the idea of de-Christianization. Okay, and so the radicals, interestingly enough, not Robespierre, he wasn't really a big fan of this, but he went along with it. But a lot of the Jacobins, they said, all of our problems really come from Christianity. And so they tried to kill it. They tried to completely destroy the Christian religion. Whereas a multitude of the founders in America considered themselves to be Christians, and they believed they were doing God's work and they were doing the work of the Bible. These people tried to destroy the religion. And so they created what they called the Temple of Reason. And this was at the very famous Cathedral Notre Dame. So they closed down all the Catholic churches. They hired this actress to dress up in a toga, and they called her the goddess of reason. And they said, from now on, we're not going to worship God, we're going to worship the goddess of reason. Not literally the actress, but she was just a symbol that, again, from the Enlightenment, we're going to worship reason and logic and rational thought and those kind of things. And so the radicals, they persecuted the Catholics and the Protestants. They really didn't discriminate. They were just anti-religion. As I said, Robespierre was actually opposed to this because he thought it would decrease the loyalty to the revolution, because there were so many Catholics in France. Like I said, he agreed to go along with it, but he always felt like it was the wrong thing to do, and he was right, because it did turn a lot of people against the revolution. They went so far with this as they even created a new calendar. Remember, we talked about the first couple of days in class that the calendar was a Christian calendar created by the Catholic Church based on Jesus. And so they completely got rid of that calendar and they created a new one. And so the year 1792, they changed that to year 1 instead of 1792. Each month had 3 10-day weeks, because think about it, where's a 7-day week come from? Well, that comes from the Bible. It's exactly where it comes from. And so they wanted to change that. So they said every month has 3 weeks in it that are 10 days long. I mean, they changed everything because they wanted to get away from that. In 1793, the President of the United States at that time, the first president, was George Washington, and he wrote a lot about this in his diary, frequently complained when trying to do business with France. He said, I don't know who's in charge over there. I can't even tell you what day it is over there, so it's hard to make a deal and say, well, we'll deliver something on such and such, because they had completely changed the calendar. It was very frustrating for President Washington to have to try to deal with these people. Okay, but those were some of the key changes that they tried to make. Well, once everybody turns against the radicals and they lose control, it goes back to the moderates again. And so they're going to create a new government. So we just talked about those things. They're going to create a new government called the Directory. And these are just some depictions of Robespierre being arrested and Robespierre being executed. So they're going to create this new government called the Directory, which was led by the bourgeoisie moderates, who had originally been in charge of the revolution but had been replaced by the radicals. So they kind of come back into power. They write yet another new constitution. They don't want a king, they don't want a dictator like Robespierre. So the Directory itself was a 5-man committee. So they decided to spread the power out among these 5 men. And these guys, they will reopen all the churches. They get rid of the de-Christianization. They realize that that was a mistake. So they will do that. The bad news, though, one of the goals of the revolution, again, was to help the poor people, make everybody equal. The one good thing the radicals had done is they had said everybody can vote, at least all the men could vote. The Directory gets rid of that. And they said only men that own property and pay a tax could vote. Okay? And this move to replace the radicals was known as the Thermidorian reaction. Okay, this is what this was called, the move to replace the radicals. But so again, the revolution is supposed to help all these poor people. Now they're going back to, well, only the rich people now can afford to vote, the property owners, because the bourgeoisie, frankly, they didn't trust the peasants. And so they had sold them a bill of goods that, hey, the revolution is going to help all you peasants, but really they didn't have any faith in the peasants, and they don't want to give them any real authority or any participation. So they only wanted those people that really had a stake in the country, people with money, people with property. They wanted to make sure they were the only ones that could vote. Now, the new moderates here, they made peace with Prussia and Spain. They did negotiate peace deals with them, but they did remain at war with Austria and Britain. So that's going to continue for a while. Now, the thing about the Directory, these guys were very weak. It was a weak government. They were very corrupt. They took bribes, and they were interested in lining their own pockets. They relied on the military to support it, and the people really were looking for new leadership. And that's why you see by the dates, the Directory's not going to last really long. People are looking for somebody new to lead them, somebody that's competent, somebody that they can have faith in and believe in. And that brings us to this guy. You might have heard of him, Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon was France's most popular general. In 1799, he was only 30 years old. And during all that time where France had lost a lot of battles and things had gone poorly for them, the bright shining light for the French army was Napoleon. He was a brilliant tactician. He really understood military strategy and how to outmaneuver people. And so he was really popular because in the newspapers, hey, Napoleon wins again. Napoleon, he was always winning when they were suffering so many other defeats. And so Napoleon was a very ambitious man, and he believed that he should be in charge of France. He knew that he was really popular with the French people. So and the committee, the Directory was not. So in 1799, Napoleon was on campaign in Egypt with his army. He left his army and he returned to Paris because he really believed that the French people would rally around him and they would much prefer him as their leader as they would the Directory. And Napoleon was dead right. He read this perfectly and he was correct on it. So Napoleon comes in and he's going to lead what is known as a coup d'etat. A coup d'etat, which is a forced overthrow of the government. Okay, and so most of the time a coup is pretty bloody. We saw in 1688, the Glorious Revolution, it was not. This is another example of one that was pretty bloodless. Napoleon goes to the streets and they're Viva Napoleon, the crowds are cheering, they love this guy. And so he basically goes into the Directory, look, nobody cares about you guys, everybody's on my side, and he just kicks them out. And they realize they didn't have any support, and so he really doesn't have to kill anybody. uh, by taking over here. So it is a pretty bloodless coup. And so this brings an end to the French Revolution. So officially, the French Revolution is 10 years, from 1789 to 1799, but the rule of Napoleon is going to bring that to an end. The one good thing that does come out of this for the peasants, their life had improved somewhat. They don't get to vote really, but a lot of them do begin to have more opportunities to own their own property. And they're eventually going to get a little more property than they maybe otherwise would have had. So the revolution certainly does not accomplish all of the goals that they wanted to for the common people, but obviously it did get rid of the monarchy. But it's really going to lead into, again, a one-person rule by Napoleon, and we're going to talk about that next and see how that's going to go. And there's my boy Napoleon. All right, so let's start talking a little bit about France under Napoleon. We got a few minutes left to finish up this lesson. And so let me tell you a little bit about Napoleon. And I was thinking that didn't have those dates up there. Well, Napoleon was born in 1769, so as we said, he's about 30 years old here in 1799. He had a very humble start. He came from a very poor Corsican family, lived on the island of Corsica, which is just south of France, but it was part of France at the time. Napoleon is widely believed to have been really short, but that's not really true, especially for his time period. Now, he would be considered short today, but not in his time period. He was 5'7", so that was, pretty close to average at the time. But even some psychologists refer to the Napoleon complex today. If somebody is really short and they're very sensitive about it, they refer to that as Napoleon complex. But again, that's kind of a myth. He wasn't really that short for his time period. He did have an extraordinarily bad temper. But Napoleon was, there's no doubt about it, that he was a military genius. He's always, if you look at the all-time list of great military leaders and generals, he's normally in the top 2 or 3. A lot of historians rank him number 1. He was a military genius. And aside from that, he was a natural-born leader. He just, we have a leadership class here at school. You can teach that to some extent, and people can work on it and become better leaders, and I have no doubt that that's true. But there are some people that are just gifted in this. They're just born with it. They don't really learn it. They just have it. And Napoleon's one of those guys. Okay? And so men are going to follow him. They're going to be devoted to him. He can get people to do most anything that he wants them to do. And that's a real gift. Either you have it or you don't. And he definitely had it. So he saw the military was a way to rise himself up through the ranks. And so he does that. And he commanded the respect and loyalty of his troops. If he told them to march off a cliff, they probably would, because they always believed he was right. And when he said to do something, it was going to work, and they trusted him. And this is going to make his army even more formidable, because they always believed they were going to win. Hey, we've got Napoleon on our side. We can't lose. And that will play into the opponents of Napoleon. They feel the same way. Oh, no, we're fighting Napoleon. We can't win. So a lot of that was psychological too, but Napoleon was full of confidence. He instilled his men with the confidence, and they fought really well and really hard for him, and they were patriotic and they were dedicated, and they believed in his military genius, and it was there. There's no doubt about it. Now, Napoleon was a very intelligent man. He was very curious, a Renaissance man in that sense. He read about a lot of different subjects. Whenever he was on military campaign, he always took scholars and professors with him to teach him different things. And he had some with him when he was in Egypt in 1799, because he really was interested in the pharaohs and in the ancient Egyptian civilization. And one thing that talked about these, okay, couldn't remember if I put that up there. One thing that Napoleon's men discovered was something called the Rosetta Stone. And the Rosetta Stone had 3 languages carved into it: hieroglyphics, Demotic, with a T, not demonic, but Demotic, and Greek. And so they correctly figured out that this was a translation, and this is how we learned to understand to read hieroglyphics, the ancient Egyptian language that up until that point hadn't been deciphered, nobody could figure it out. But through the Rosetta Stone, we were able to do that. The actual Rosetta Stone is in the British Museum today. I've actually seen it. But Napoleon, they discovered this when they were actually there in Egypt. So it's kind of a cool thing that happened as well. All right, so Napoleon's first government is known as the Consulate. And Napoleon controlled everything, but he does something really smart. He gives each group, we talked about all those groups when we were talking about the estate system, he gave each group in France something that they wanted to ensure their loyalty, and it worked very well. So he would just look for different things, and he would gain the loyalty of groups by providing something that they really want. So by 1802, Napoleon had now defeated all of France's enemies. He had won, finally, the Wars of the Revolution. And so he named himself consul for life. The first consul was the title that he took for himself. And most everybody approved. Nobody really objected. They loved this guy. He's incredibly popular. And again, he ends the Wars of the Revolution. So they love this guy. Well, Napoleon has bigger ambitions. He doesn't want to just rule France. He believes he should rule all of Europe. I mean, he's full of self-confidence, and he believes he should just be the natural emperor. So in 1804, he is going to crown himself Emperor Napoleon I at a ceremony at Notre Dame. And in those days, when you were going to be crowned something, a king, an emperor, whatever, the Pope would always come and put the crown on your head. And so Napoleon invited the Pope to come do that. But boy, was the Pope in for a surprise. So you got all these people at this big ceremony, and the Pope gets ready to put the crown on Napoleon's head. Napoleon jerks the crown out of the Pope's hand and puts it on his own head, which sucked all the oxygen out of the room. Everybody was just stunned that he did that. But he's making a statement. Nobody was powerful enough to crown him but himself. And so that's kind of the last nail in the coffin, if you would, of is there an argument between the Pope and the kings who has the most power? That had already pretty much been decided, but if there were any doubts, that pretty much ended it right there. And so Napoleon was now determined he was going to conquer all of Europe. That's his next. He's firmly in control of France. So he launches a series of wars. By 1806, Napoleon had taken control, for example, of most of the German territory. And so he prompted the last Holy Roman Emperor, Francis II, who again was still a Habsburg, member of the Habsburg family. He ordered Holy Roman Emperor Francis II to formally dissolve the Holy Roman Empire in 1806. And at that point, he became Emperor, Holy Roman Emperor Francis II became Emperor Francis I, just of Austria. That's really all that was left of the old Holy Roman Empire. So it had pretty much been gone since the Peace of Westphalia, but this is kind of the final straw, and the Holy Roman Empire ceases to exist. All right, a couple more things as we wrap up. His government policies, like Peter the Great and Frederick, he used meritocracy. He wanted to promote people. I mean, after all, he had risen from low ranks, and so he wanted peasants to know they could rise up. If they had talent, they would get promoted. That makes him very popular. He did allow some limited freedom of speech and of the press. You could criticize him a little bit. If he told you to stop, that'd be a wise thing for you to stop, but he would let you do that some. So for an absolute ruler, a lot more lenient on that stuff than most. He created a national bank, and he promoted education. Okay, the Concordat of 1801. Napoleon, this was his deal with the Catholic Church. Now, Napoleon was not an atheist. He did believe in God, but he wasn't particularly religious. But he realized it was very important to a lot of the French people. And Napoleon did feel that morality was important. He wanted the French people to be moral, so he knew the church was important for that. And so he makes a deal with Pope Pius VII, was the Pope at the time. And so he makes a deal with the Pope. So he's going to make Catholicism the official French religion. Now, he still allowed freedom. You could be a Huguenot, you could be a Protestant, that was okay. But the Catholic Church was going to get special privileges from the government. Napoleon would now appoint bishops. So he got to do it instead of the Pope, but he also told the Pope he would pay their salary. So the church didn't have to pay it. So both sides kind of get something there. And remember, the revolutionaries, they had stolen all the Catholic Church land to pay off the debt, and the Catholics had been fussing about that ever since, and rightfully so. Their land was stolen from them. But he got the church here to give up their claims because he said, look, I understand your land was stolen, but it was resold to other people. I'm not now going to steal it from them to give it back to you. So you just need to get over it. I hate it for you, but you just lost the land. And so the Catholic Church agreed to do that. Okay, so this was kind of the peace that he makes with the Catholic Church. All right, and then last thing we want to look at today is the Napoleonic Code, which Napoleon gets passed in 1804. This was his legal code, his set of laws for France. And I'll just give you kind of a quick summary, the most important things in here. He said all citizens were equal under the law. And of course, we're talking about male citizens here. No more class privileges, and that was a goal of the revolution. He protected private property, said nobody's going to lose their property. He did grant some limited rights for women. I mean, at least it was a little step forward for them, but they still weren't considered equal to men. And a lot of the Napoleonic Code is still used today in France, and it's also used in the state of Louisiana because obviously Napoleon owned that for a while. And at the end of his life, Napoleon was being interviewed. He was one of the few people that was world famous at the time. And the interviewer asked Napoleon, what do you think you'll be remembered for? And you would think he would have said all the great military battles that he won and that sort of thing. But he actually didn't. He said the thing he was proudest of that he thought would be the most long lasting was this, the Napoleonic Code. He said, man, people will forget about the battles. But I think the code is going to have the longest lasting impact on France. And he was right. So some people have maybe forgotten the battles, but as I said, the Napoleonic Code is still in effect. A lot of it is still in effect today in the year 2020 in France. And so he was right about that. All right, so that brings us to the French Empire. That's a good place to stop. So tomorrow, on Wednesday, we will try to pick it up and we will talk about the Napoleonic Wars and the empire that Napoleon creates. And then we will be looking at Napoleon's downfall, how that comes about, and finish up this chapter with the Congress of Vienna. So that's what we'll be covering over the next day or two. So as always, I miss you guys, love you guys. I hope you're staying healthy. I hope everybody in your family is doing well. And if you have any questions about anything, just feel free to email me.